Hi, everyone at the Midwestern Conference on Literature, Language, and Media. I'm Madeline Happold, and I'm going to be reading my paper on Carmen Maria Machado's Her Body and Other Parties. Before I get started, though, I wanted to say thank you to Northern Illinois University and the conference organizers for having me. Give a little background of myself. So I am a second-year master's student at DePaul University. I also got my BA at DePaul in English and Journalism with a minor in Spanish. My research really focuses on the intersection of literature and cultural or popular media studies, and I'm really focused on accessibility in higher academia. So even though this isn't preferred for a conference, I'm really excited to kind of explore this format as kind of a prototype for the work I would want to do in the future. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen with everyone so you can see a PowerPoint that I made. Okay, so my paper is titled Between Bodies, Cultural Entrenchment and Enchantment in Carmen Maria Machado's Her Body and Other Parties. Velvet chokers and children's stories, television series and haunted cities, women in pain, women with flaws, women of horror. In her 2017 collection of short stories, Her Body and Other Parties, author Carmen Maria Machado uses hyperbole to shock readers into paying attention to real-life terrors. Her work comments on sexual assault and violence against women through artistic revision of popular media, which I define as storytelling widely circulated in the public sphere. My analysis will focus specifically on two stories of the collection: The Husband Stitch, a rewriting of the story The Green Ribbon from the popular children's book In a Dark, Dark Room, and Especially Heinous, a rewriting of the television series Law and Order SVU. I will borrow the term cultural entrenchment from the Dutch digital humanities scholars Volkert Karsdorp and Lauren Fonten, based on the idea of shared sociocultural knowledge of the media, meaning these medias are so popular in the public sphere that both author and reader are able to recognize the intertextuality, notice the authorial working, and interpret the new meaning. Machado queers these forms of popular media, children's stories, and television shows by situating them in the realm of the fantastic to both hyperbolize and reveal the mystery of their true horrific undertones. In his 1975 work, The Fantastic, A Structural Approach to a Literary Genre, Svetsan Tudorov defines the fantastic as the hesitation experienced by a person who knows only the laws of nature, confronting an apparently supernatural event. The fantastic situates itself in the sphere of uncertainty and liminality. It is precisely in the fact that something can exist in both the realm and the real and the supernatural that it becomes both recognizable and othered. The same can be said of Machado's short stories, as they are recognizable thanks to their source's cultural entrenchment and othered because of Machado's reworking of major themes of the genre. By rewriting these forms of popular media culture, Machado situates her short stories both in the realm of imaginary enchantment and the realm of cultural entrenchment. The unease or horror lies in the story's ability to be both tangible yet intangible, understood yet incomprehensible, familiar yet uncanny. The fantastic deconstructs hegemonic narratives while repeating them and defying sociocultural expectations while rehearsing them. Thus, the fantastic is queer, when defined both as strange, odd, peculiar, eccentric, or as sexual or gender identity that destabilizes binary categorizations. In their book Transgressive Tales, Queering the Grimms, author Kay Turner and Pauline Greenhill break the fairy tale, in which I would also include the fantastic, into four pleasures of the genre: the eroticized, taboo, perverse, and woman-focused, that provide alternatives and sometimes even active resistance to mainstream cultural constructions. Both the Machado short stories deconstruct the body as it questions normative structures of gender identity. The women in these stories are queer in the sense that their bodies are recognizably female but also distinguishably non-female. The women occupy notions of the fantastic in the sense that their bodies exist both in the real and the imaginary. They take on physical forms. They can have sex, be stitched up, or be violated, but they can also be abnormal, abhorrent, and non-human. The first story featured in the collection, The Husband Stitch, is a story of a young woman who falls in love, marries, has children, and yet maintains one rule in her house: no one is to touch the green ribbon around her neck. At the end of the story, once she consents to allowing her husband to untie the ribbon, she is decapitated. The story echoes The Green Ribbon, an excerpt from the 1984 children's book In a Dark, Dark Room by Alvin Schwartz. In The Green Ribbon, a girl named Jenny wears a similar green ribbon around her neck, marries, and becomes old and ill. She allows her husband to remove the ribbon and her head falls off. Yet the tale does not even originate with Schwartz. The neck ribbon or choker originates with the French Revolution. In perverse fashion, 18th century women would wear red chokers around their neck to pay homage to guillotine victims. In the 19th century, the cultural connotations of chokers shifted as prostitutes repurposed the fashion statement with black ribbons. Perhaps the earliest fictionalized version of the tale is Washington Irving's 1824 short story, The Adventure of a German Student. The story is set in Paris during the French Revolution, where a young scholar falls in love with a beautiful woman who wears a black band around her neck. In the daylight, the woman turns out to be a corpse. Through my research, I found other adaptations of tales containing supernatural ribbons of various colors, and while these stories share astonishing characteristics, it is unknown if they are directly correlated. Yet, it is noteworthy that all speakers fear women who hold secrets and women who openly display sexuality. The premise remains the same, as the image of the ribbon becomes entrenched in folklore to symbolize deceit or infidelity. The green ribbon of the husband stitch becomes more than a macabre fashion statement or a children's tale, but rather a commentary on body politics, secrets within marriage, and a metaphor for cultural discourse surrounding sexual assault. Deriving from Short's popular children's book, The Husband Stitch is stripped of its innocent fright and instead infused with real-life horror. In the Dark Dark Room version, Jenny is like other girls except for one thing, just as the narrator of The Husband Stitch is interchangeable with all other women. In The Husband Stitch, there are also multiple women with ribbons strung around body parts, each displayed like open secrets. The narrator is that of a deviant woman, related both to the women of secrets and sexual relations in which the tale shares a story. She breaks hegemonic morals of feminine propriety because she enjoys pleasure, by having sex in public, sex before marriage, and by teaching her boy. Her only thing that she wishes to keep for her own is the secret of her green ribbon around her throat, of which is the only thing her husband wants to know. It is the beginning and the end of her husband's desires. The ribbon also becomes sexualized, and he touches the bow delicately, as if massaging my sex. The moments of tension with the ribbon also occur around sex. When they have sex before their wedding, her husband places his hand on her ribbon during the act while whispering, "I love you, I love you, I love you," as if speaking directly to the ribbon. The strip of cloth becomes both guarded and idolized like virginity, like a secret, like something that could easily be taken without permission. The ribbon is what holds the protagonist together. It is the stitch between the mental and the body, both cognitively and corporally. The stitch of the ribbon can also be compared to the stitch she receives after childbirth. The husband stitch, of which the title derives its name, refers to the extra stitch given to a woman after the vagina and anus are cut to help alleviate childbirth. The stitch is medically unnecessary but makes the vagina supposedly tighter than before childbirth. This can increase the husband's pleasure during sex, hence the name, but can also make sex painful for the woman. Since women are unconscious during the procedure, the decision is often left to the husband. In Machado's story, the husband decides to get the stitch without her consent, and when she wakes after surgery, the doctor tells her she's all sewn up, nice and tight. Everyone's happy. Her body was manipulated and stitched for pleasure, treated like something subhuman or lifeless that could be taken apart and put back together by and for the men surrounding her. In Schwartz's The Green Ribbon, the ribbon is removed because she is dying. She allows Alfred to see what I could not tell you before. In The Husband Stitch, it is her husband that pushes her to take off the ribbon, and when it is removed, she feels as lonely as I have ever been. The ribbon can be read as metaphoric, as the final thing that her husband desires, so he no longer desires her. Her metaphoric death, in which she was once hers, is exposed, in which his ultimate pleasure becomes her pain. For as much as she gives for him and pleases him, he still takes to please himself. The terror is the sacrifices women make and culture's tradition of perpetuating morals that confine, erase, or punish women for their deviant pleasures. Machado's The Husband Stitch begins with a set of instructions. The opening text, first introduced in parentheses, advises the reader, if you read this story out loud, please use the following voices, and then offers different interpretive characters as a father, son, boy, and me. The final me is that of the final me voice is like that of all other women, interchangeable with my own. It is not certain whether the parenthetical additions are meant to be the female protagonist's narrative voice, that of a narrator besides the protagonist, or that of Machado, the author. This opening already sets a piece as oral and interactive. Rather than a text, it becomes a script, adaptable for individual performance. While the instructions act as a preface to the individual story, they also serve to situate the story in the oral tradition of folk tales before the reader is even aware of the narrative. By means of a later interjection, it can be deduced that the reading is meant to be communal. There is reference to sing the half-remembered lyrics of old songs to the closest person to you, and give a paring knife to the listener. This defies the modern assumption of reading as a solitary act and attempts to introduce the text as participatory and dialogic. Folk tales were often passed down orally before manifesting in written text, just as scary stories or horror stories are often shared around a campfire, at parties, or with a community of people. The story is also polyphonic. Within the Green Ribbon, there are other cautionary tales about deviant women. These subplots were also popularized by Schwartz in his 1981 children's story, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, that of The Girl Who Stood on Graves and the White Satin Evening Gown. The protagonist states, "I have heard all of the stories about girls like me, and I am unafraid to make more of them," both acknowledging her role as storyteller and her role as character within the story. The line is also metatextual in reference to the story's own repurposing of prior folklore. Much of the original tales do not change, but become polyphonic, in which the narrator gives her interpretation of their imparted moral lessons. When the narrator tells the tale of the woman who died after wearing a dead woman's wedding dress, she says the moral of the story is not to be poor, or perhaps the moral is that brides never fare well in stories, and one should avoid either being a bride or being in a story. This is again ironic in that the protagonist is to become a bride in a story who will not receive a happy ending. When she tells of the girl who died of fright from standing on a grave, the moral or mistake is three-pronged: scoffing, pride, and being right. The protagonist comments on the way that stereotypes shape cultural narrative through the metaphor of raindrops in a pond, and that they are born from the clouds separately, but once they have come together, there is no way to tell them apart. Each story inclusion questions whose stories and narratives we believe and why, how people are portrayed in stories and who gets to speak, and who gets to have things and have secrets. The fourth short story of Machado's collection, Especially Heinous, was spurred by a bad bout of swine flu, in which the author spent 3 days in a hallucinatory state while watching Law & Order SVU on Netflix. Television is perhaps the most popular form of modern storytelling. It creates cultural icons, sparks individual and national conversation, and can be consumed both individually or communally. It is also the most bingeable form of storytelling, as instant streaming services make it easier to access hours of the same storyline. Law & Order SVU is the longest-running television drama in U.S. history, now in its 21st season. The show follows 2 New York police officers in the Special Victims Unit, a department which investigates sex-related crimes. Each SVU episode is ripped from the headlines, meaning the plot lines are based off real-life crimes that gain media attention. Of the short story, Machado told the Paris Review, "I looked up the little capsule descriptions of the episodes, and I was trying to manipulate them to make them surreal, but it was too restrictive. Then I realized that all the titles were one-word titles. And what if I just used the titles? I put only the titles all in a row, and then just started writing and imagining Benson and Stabler. Something about having the titles to hold on to. I was able to swing through them like monkey bars." The one-word titles paired with Machado's rewriting of the episodes create both a linguistic and thematic connection between the mediums. The flash fiction form takes on the capsule format of an episode summary, similar to one that can be found as a preview description on a digital streaming service. Even the chapter title is a nod to the opening credits of the television show, which state, "In the criminal justice system, sexually based offenses are considered especially heinous." Machado's flash fiction of episode synopsis is easily digestible and forgettable, just as the victims of each episode who also go unnamed. The short entries both cover up and desensitize viewers to the violence of each story. The sheer amount of episode entries is also desensitizing. Machado outlines 12 seasons in 60 pages, making it the longest in the collection. This structure is metatextual, commenting on the nauseating ways that we are able to consume sexual violence as popular culture with little ability to differentiate one character's story from another. In Especially Heinous, women's bodies become dismembered, shot at, branded, and used as plates on which to serve food. While some episode excerpts act as standalone narratives, others follow an ongoing narrative arc, mirroring that of a television drama script. In the main arc, Detective Benson is haunted by spirits in the form of women with bells for eyes, tiny brass ones dangling from the top of each socket. In the 19th century, bells were attached to graves to alert if someone was buried alive. The assumed deceased would grab a rope inside the coffin, which would sound a bell atop of the gravesite. The bells are a symbol of premature burial, but also of life unnoticed, suggesting that these women were prematurely killed and subsequently forgotten. Bells attached to church towers were often rung on special occasions like marriages or funerals. Bells that require hammers, like those of the eyes of the dead girls, are in a fixed position or are known to be hung dead. In popular discourse, a person's eyes are thought to be windows to the soul, as communicating emotions and truth words cannot. For the girls, the bells become their defining features and their form of language. The spirits with bells for eyes multiply, symbolizing the women whose crimes remain unsolved. The women follow Benson, possess her, and communicate with her through Morse code. Benson becomes full of girls and even starts referring to themselves in the collective, both mentally consumed by the women and their cases, but also physically, in which the spirit of the women literally materialize or phantomize in and around Benson. The violence of their deaths are intrinsically tied to bodies, yet their presented form is bodiless. The spirits of the dead women are permeable, existing outside of the physical bodies, their essence ever present. Especially heinous comments on the mass consumption of violence against women and how these crimes are both heinous but also commonplace and perversely obsessive in their social cultural discourse, as seen with the popularity of a television show based off true crimes of sexual violence. In the excerpt titled Screwed, there is a breaking of the fourth wall in which the character address their own lack of control in the story's narrative. It is a story Henson, the foil of Benson, tells to the DAA of a world that watches over you and me and everyone, watches our suffering like it is a game, can't stop, can't tear themselves away. If they could stop, we could stop, but they won't, so we can't. The meaning is polyphonic. Readers of the short story watch the suffering as they read the present text. Viewers also literally watch the television show, which profits off their viewership. The world in the public sphere also watches and helps perpetuate violence against women in reality. There is a perverse interest in the crimes considered especially heinous, yet women that report sex crimes are often not believed, not respected, and rarely find justice. In one of the final episode entries speaks to this consumption. In it, the DA tells Benson the story of a creature, genderless, ageless. The city flies on its back. We hear it, all of us, one way or another. It demands sacrifice, but it can only eat what we give it. The term sacrifices plays on the sacrificial female trope, where women are offered as sacrifices because they are both valuable yet dispensable in culture. The entry is titled Totem, referring to a sign or guiding principle often represented by an animal or natural figure. The creature is the city's totem, the symbol of its potentiality. If violence perpetuates, it will feed off fear and violence, just as culture has fed off the normalization of sexual violence, acts considered horrifying yet also oddly commonplace. Some endings are more terrifying than others. Rape, loveless marriage, violation, erasure. What is uneasy and immobilizing and terrifying is both our ability to recognize, but also to not comprehend the horrors that exist both in and outside of our reality in both the shared public sphere, yet entirely individual in the private act. Carmen Maria Machado's short stories The Husband Stitch and Especially Heinous critique popular media for their portrayal of female identity, bodies, and violence against women. Both short stories support and pervert the cultural entrenchment of popular media that roots itself in real stories of violence inflicted upon and endured by women. It is through the lens of fantasy that the true terrors become hyperbolized and hybridized, in which our fears have the potential to become our realities. Thank you.